Welcome to The Warehouse. Has a Sunday sermon ever left you running to Google with new theological questions? Have you ever wished you could peer behind the curtain and see how a message comes together? That's where we come in. Here at Cornerstone Church, we spend hours every week talking about Scripture. This is the place to learn about passages, dive into their context, and study the Bible's cultural background. Come to The Warehouse, where we extend what you learn from the stage.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to The Warehouse. We are excited today to be talking again about the church. Thank you guys for taking it while I was out so I could be preaching last week. Appreciate you. I heard that it went really well.
Really? Good.
I heard from you that it went really well. It hasn't released yet when we're recording this.
I know. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
You're just confident in this, aren't you?
Just confident.
You may want to explain what the purpose of this series is, because I tried.
Okay, well, I can take it. But first, you've already heard Stephanie talk. Who's that other laughing voice on this podcast?
Lucas. I'm back.
He's back.
I'm back.
3 weeks now, right? Is this your third week? Or is there a week where you weren't on?
I think this is week 3.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Wow. How does it feel?
That's good, I guess.
Yeah?
You guess.
Yeah.
The Podstalkers may be offended.
We've talked about this.
We did. Chris Sherrill actually sent me a list to start calling you guys something different.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's good.
So we're going to implement it throughout the podcast.
There were several good options on there.
I like them. I don't know which one's going to stick for me yet.
I think the Warehouse Wanderers. I just like
I like that.
I like the alliteration
Yep.
to it.
Could you make a theme song with it, Nathan?
I'm sure I could. I won't.
No. I want you to try right now.
No.
Please.
No.
Why? Just start singing. You.
Okay, so our question for today, what was it again? She also sent us a list of questions, which is
We are
so
so
helpful.
thankful. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So we said that we wanted to ask, what is your least favorite household chore? Right?
Yeah. That one works. We have multiple, so we can start with that one.
Let's do that one for today.
Lucas, you still live at home with your mom and dad.
Yeah.
So how many chores do you have to do?
Yes, Mom and Dad take care of me pretty well still.
Yeah.
I love that, though.
Well, my mom is a neat freak, and I'm not.
Messy.
So it drives her nuts when I don't take care of things how a 22-year-old should.
Yeah.
But if I had to pick anything, this is a typical boy answer. I don't like picking up after my room. It's my room, and so, if anything's in the floor, I can just step around it. If I want to pick it up, I will.
You're getting married next year.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Is Micah a neat freak?
She is.
Okay, cool.
Yep.
Cool.
Sometimes, our air quote date night would be taking her car to vacuum it out and clean it.
Wow.
Yeah. Yes.
That's impressive.
I have to learn how to clean. Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
Well, there's time. There's time, but it won't happen on its own.
No, it
So,
won't.
some focused effort. How about you, Steph?
Laundry, for sure.
Laundry.
I don't mind to do it. It's the part of putting it away.
Okay.
I don't mind to fold it. I don't mind to wash it, dry it. I don't like to put it away.
Interesting.
It's my least favorite thing.
Why do you think that is?
We have a very small house, so we don't really have room to put the things away.
Uh-huh.
So it stresses me.
So it's you have to cram it in the drawers and
Yes.
stuff or something? Okay.
Yep, that's why.
Do you have too many clothes?
Not really.
Okay.
We just have a really small house.
Sure. Yeah.
Not very much closet space.
You could always do the Marie Kondo thing and
We tried that.
really?
Yeah,
And it didn't work?
not really.
I guess not by the fact that you said we tried it.
Exactly.
I
It
don't even know what
didn't
that is.
stick. It didn't stick.
It's a minimalist approach to cleaning and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, of course I wouldn't know.
Yeah.
It was on Netflix.
Yeah. For me, I get really grossed out sometimes by dishes. So particular textures with dishes, I was realizing the other day, one of the ones that grosses me out is we eat a lot of eggs in our house.
Mhm.
It's scrambled eggs that have attached to a pan or something like that, and then they get wet, and so they're gummy
Yeah.
and slimy, and you're trying to scrape it out of a pan or something like that.
Mm.
That texture weirds me out.
I think Lucas may puke.
Yeah.
No, well, I worked at the vault on the square. So, and I did do dishwashing. So I am honestly not grossed out by it. It would take me longer if I didn't just like scoop everything out
Yeah.
with my hands. So I'm used to that.
Yeah. I just don't like it.
Oh, I didn't like it either. Yeah. No,
Right.
it's not fun.
So that's probably my least favorite. The one that I'm probably the worst at is like putting my socks in the hamper. I'm really bad about that. Like they are frequently left random places. The worst offenders, I just like leave them on the coffee table.
Tia just throws them at you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Oh,
Don't
boy.
mean to, and my wife is very patient with me. But yeah, I accidentally leave my socks everywhere. Wow, this has been enlightening, and I feel like there's some psychoanalyzing to do. So if you're listening and you have some like psychological insights into like what might have shaped each of us to hate these particular chores, I'd be really interested to hear.
Me too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, we're in week 2 of our series on the church. It is called Bigger Than Me, which we did another series on the church about 5 years ago. I guess it was probably almost exactly 5 years ago because it was for our 20th
Mm-hmm.
anniversary of being Cornerstone. And we're coming up on the 25th, which is why we're kind of taking a look at what does it mean to be a part of the church. And so Bigger Than Me is that being tied into an idea that like the church is more significant than any one individual, but like it's something that like carries on. It started way before us. It will continue after us. It's something that Jesus himself is building and has built. He tells us that the gates of hell will not prevail against it, which tells us that it ain't going nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
Like the church is a permanent part of God's plan. And so with that, when we're hopping into this series, we're kind of taking a look at, I think we're looking at it from a past, present, and future approach to church. So my week, I got to talk about like the institution of the church and like what it, like the different metaphors or analogies or images that the Bible uses for a church, and what they all mean, and what even is the church, defining it. This week we're going to be looking at how does our present tie into a long line of faithfulness, and then next week we'll be talking about some future stuff. Hey, what do we know for sure about what God's doing in the Big C Church and in Little C Cornerstone? And also, like, what do we think he might be leading us toward in the future? So that's going to be a fun week as well.
Yeah.
Looking forward.
I know. So I don't know if you're going to talk about this in your sermon, but you just gave our weekly staff devotion this week, and you did it from Ephesians 5.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that was super enlightening. And
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it was just really good because normally that passage is used to describe husband and wife,
Right.
and you used it to reflect the church. So are you going to talk a little bit about that in your sermon?
I don't really have it built into the sermon.
Okay. So can you do like a little?
Just briefly. So Ephesians 5 talks about like husbands loving their wives as Christ loved the church.
Mhm.
And it's an interesting thing because he goes back and forth, and we usually use it as like, okay, so the foundation is the way Christ loved the church. And so now that's supposed to be applied to husbands. And that's largely the way Paul's using it. But also at the end of it, he says, this mystery is profound, but I'm telling you that it refers to Christ and the church.
Mm-hmm.
So there's this interesting thing of he's saying like, hey, let me talk with you about what your marriage is supposed to be like, using the example of the way Christ loves the church, because your marriage is supposed to display the love Christ has for the church. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, this whole thing is about like putting the love Christ has for the church on display. So we see in that passage things like that he loved his bride and gave himself up for her. We see that he nourishes and cherishes his bride. He pays attention to every need that his church has, and gladly steps out to meet those needs. And so we just see this beautiful picture of Jesus really loving the church and being committed to her, and seeing it through to the end with the desire that it's like he loves the church as she is right now, with every spot and blemish, and also is committed to what the church is becoming in the future.
Mm-hmm.
And so we talk some about how Jesus doesn't just love some future idealistic version of the church. He doesn't just love the version where all the warts are gone and the blemishes are gone. And I mentioned a little bit how it's like, how terrible would it be if you, like, as you're getting married, you're like, babe, I really love what you could become
Right.
in the future. Like if you dropped a few pounds and started going to the gym and like had just a little bit of Botox, you could be something really special. It's like,
That'd be bad.
That'd be a horrible way to start a relationship.
that'd be bad. But sometimes I think like we approach the church that way.
Mm-hmm.
We think like either we just discount the church altogether and say it's ugly and messed up and we don't want any part of it. Or we say, man, I love what the church could become. But the reality is, like, as we're committed to the church as she is right now.
Yeah.
Like with the messy relationships, with the conflicts, with the difficulties, with the sin issues, with everything that needs to be worked through. It's like Jesus loves his bride, and so should we.
Mm-hmm.
So
It's
anyway,
good.
that's kind
Thank
of
you for like sharing that brief. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was, encouraging, enlightening, and
cool.
I liked it a lot.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Yeah, so today, as we're talking about the church present, we are again going to pick up with the church past and bring it into the present. We're studying Hebrews 11:39 through Hebrews 12:4. So the end of chapter 11, going into the beginning of chapter 12. What do you guys have as big ideas for this passage?
I had, we press on by faith because there is evidence of a promise worth striving for.
Good.
Noise.
Mine is, with faith and endurance, we are called to run the race set before us, inspired by the example of Jesus, who endured the cross for the joy set before him.
Sweet. It was long but profound.
Oh,
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. My big idea, we are to follow in the example of Jesus and the saints of old,
Mm-hmm.
which I also just want to clarify, because I was talking with somebody the other day and they were talking about like, hey, is that passage talking about like us or just about the saints? And the Bible's really clear that like each and every one of us is a saint.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, I think we carry some stuff from like Catholic tradition and everything where we're like, okay, so saints are those like super holy people or the, but like we are called to be citizens of a new nation, a new city, and we're also called to be saints.
Mhm.
So it's just the set apart ones, sanctified.
Love it.
Okay. Let's talk context of Hebrews. This is a kind of fun one because there's a lot that we don't know and then some
Right.
interesting speculation. So bring us up to speed. What's the context for Hebrews?
So we do not know who the author of Hebrews is. A lot of commentators and historians like to point it to Paul,
Mhm.
but from like reading it and me personally, I do not think it is Paul. I would say it is, no, I'm not going to say who I think it is, but
It's not that the majority opinion is that it is Paul, but
Right.
throughout history there have been a lot of people who have just like lumped it in with the
Paul's
Paul's
writings.
writings and stuff.
Right.
But actually now there's more evidence to say like, hey, it probably was not.
right.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, they've thrown out Barnabas, Apollos.
Mhm.
I can't, Priscilla, I think is another one that's been
okay.
thrown out there.
Forgot that one.
But like one thing that we do know is that the Holy Spirit authored Hebrews and all of Scripture.
Mm-hmm.
So even though we don't know who the physical writer was of Hebrews, we do know that it is authoritative.
Yep.
So it's a really, we've talked about this recently on the podcast, but this was the book that
Mhm.
changed the way I study Scripture. So it's definitely one of my favorites to sit here and get to bring to people.
Yeah.
The audience, we're not sure who it is, but the author expects the readers to know at least the first 5 books of the Bible, so the Pentateuch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of the author like taking passages from the Old Testament, specifically the Pentateuch, and tying it into how Jesus is the ultimate fulfillment of that,
Mhm.
which is a really neat pattern. Like whenever you look at the structure, you see just as Jesus told the Pharisees, he's like, hey, you guys study the scriptures thinking that like in them you're going to find life, but you're missing the fact that they point to me.
Right.
And so like we ought to approach scripture with a Christ first approach. Like, how does this point me to Jesus? And the author of Hebrews does a phenomenal job of doing that.
Well, and if you don't, like, this is just giving like a little study nugget.
Mm-hmm.
Like when you're reading the book of Hebrews, if you don't understand what he's talking about, go back
Yeah.
and read that little part of Scripture. It may take you a few times to kind of comprehend it, but there's a reason why this author is pulling this piece into it. And
That's good.
so, yeah, it just really helps you understand more of what he's trying to convey, or she.
What else did you have, Lucas?
Just as far as dating it, I think we all agreed on AD, I want to say 65 or around that area.
Definitely before 70.
Yes, before 70 would have.
Why would we say that?
Well, the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem was in AD 70, or it had already occurred, and so it would be kind of redundant to say that Jesus is better than the temple if, the temple is gone already. So
everybody's like, no joke.
Yeah, it's like,
Yeah.
right. And then Hebrews also still spoke of the Jewish sacrificial system as if like it was still a present reality, which wouldn't be likely, of course, if the temple was gone.
Right. That's cool. We do seem to know. So with that, we can start to pinpoint a little bit of would have been nearing Emperor Claudius's reign, which is where persecution was getting ready to ramp up a lot toward Christians. And so there seems to be already some either pockets of persecution or economic oppression and stuff. But maybe not Christians being dragged out and killed or thrown to lions and that kind of stuff happening in a widespread way so far. But that was getting ready to happen. And so whenever we look at the audience, it seems to be that they were Jewish believers, because they otherwise there'd be no need really for him to emphasize so strongly that hey, Jesus is better than the sacrificial system. He's better than angels. He's better than the high priest. He's better than Melchizedek. So that would be kind of unnecessary if they were not Jewish people. And so it seems to be a church or churches filled with Jewish believers. Commentaries said most likely Hellenistic Jews that would have used the Septuagint,
which means Greek-speaking Jews. Okay.
Yep. And so I think all that stuff helps frame up the book, because as you start to recognize those pieces of what's going on, you start to put together, some people have a very hard time with Hebrews, and there are some difficult passages in there because there's some things that there's some warnings that he issues about not going back on your faith, because if you do, there's no way for you to be saved again. That it puts a little bit of a moment of doubt in your mind of hang on, so can I lose my salvation? What's going on here? And so it's really helpful to understand that he's talking to a group of believers who were facing persecution of some kind and were tempted to apostatize, to step away. And he's saying hey, you're not going to find another way. You're not going to find a way going back to the ceremonial law or to the high priest, or Jesus is truly the fulfillment of all those things. And there's nowhere else you can turn. It's like Peter saying, where else can we turn? You have the words of life.
So you said two words that I would like you to define for people if they don't know what it is. Okay.
Yep.
So Septuagint, what is that? Septuagint
was the Greek Old Testament. So it was the Greek translation. And it came from 70 translators, which is why they use the word. So sept means 70.
Okay. And then apostasy.
Apostasy or apostatize is to recant your faith, to turn away from it and say, I used to say I was a believer in Jesus, but I am no longer.
Awesome. Yep. Yeah, just in case somebody hasn't ever heard those two words, hey, this is what it means.
It's good.
It's not something we hear often. So we do know that the author knew Timothy, because we see in Hebrews 13:23 where he brings up Timothy's name. So that's kind of neat. And there's two main goals of Hebrews, right? So you were talking and touching on it a little bit, but how Jesus is superior and the remaining faithful to Jesus. So making it to
I think it's really, it's kind of a burning the bridges moment, right? It's kind of one of or burn the ships, I guess is the common saying for that. It's you've come to faith in Jesus, but you're going to be tempted to say well, I used to do just the Jewish thing and that was working okay. Is it okay for me to go back to that? And so for him to say absolutely not, absolutely not. You cannot return to that. Jesus is the fulfillment of those things. It's not like Jesus or the high priest, Jesus or your ceremonial law. Jesus is the way.
And I think that's really good to bring up too, because there was probably not a great understanding of what they were supposed to be doing now either, because there was a way that they were living for so long. And then to just be like, hey, actually, those things that you were doing don't matter anymore.
Yeah.
So I bet there had to be a teaching constantly of like, nope, I know this may feel weird at first, but actually we don't do that.
Yeah. And for a lot of them, the pressure and persecution at this point was likely not coming from the Roman government, but it was coming from their Jewish friends and neighbors.
Right.
So with that, like the pressure to, if you think about economic pressure, it's like, so I'm kicked out of my family. I own a storefront, but like none of the people in my community will come shop at my store. So now my family is like starving because I can't put food on the table. And and my Jewish friends are saying, well, if you just came back to like what you were doing, if you just started practicing the same way that we were, and you say like Jesus is not the Messiah, then like we'll start shopping at your place again. Like that temptation would be very real. So for him to say like, absolutely not, you can't go back to that. Jesus is the true and better.
Yeah, that carries a lot of weight too. Like when you're thinking, being put in that situation of like, maybe they're not possibly not getting murdered at this time for their faith, but the persecution aspect of like, hey, you can't feed your kids.
Right. Yeah.
So that carries a lot of weight.
Yeah. Yep.
All right. Are we ready to move on into
I think so.
text? Okay. 39:40.
Yep. And all these, though commended through their faith, did not receive what was promised, since God had provided something better for us, that apart from us, they should not be made perfect. What you got?
I was going to point out, commended through their faith. I would definitely butcher this, so I'm going to need help from you.
Okay.
But I know we had like a really cool discovery about, all these through their faith. So if we look back a few verses, we have all these Hall of Faith stories. And we had, like you were talking about, the ESV says through their faith, and we were wondering like why do they use that word choice? And so we were kind of confused on what that meant. And so this was like their active faith, like whenever we were looking at those stories, the Hall of Faith stories, that wasn't like their saving faith, but their steadfast faith.
Right. So what he's encouraging them most toward is ongoing faithfulness. So he's just told a whole bunch of stories of people who did like very, very difficult things because they believed in a God who was going to fulfill a promise that they hadn't seen yet. And so he's saying all of these people that I just talked about, all of these Hall of Faith people, they all received a commendation through faith. So they, because of their faith, and their faith being the vehicle for receiving that commendation, they all received a well done, good and faithful servant from God, because they, with the knowing the little bit that they did, they acted in faith.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of crazy when we get to bring that onto the podcast, right? So we spent like 10 to 15 minutes just having a long discussion about this verse. And coming here, we're able to be like, okay, actually we came to this and this is what it means. And I think that's pretty neat how like it was a lot of back and forth yesterday of like, okay, so what are you saying exactly, Nathan? How did you get there? Okay, wait, hold on. Say it one more time. And
and it's because like, so, I mean, anytime you're studying the Bible, I encourage people to be like very, very curious. I mean, you could pretty much take any one of these words and say like, I wonder why they chose that word. Like the word commended here, in Greek is the same word as witness. It's the word for martyr. And so it's like, why use the word commended? What does it mean that they were commended? And we had a conversation about like, okay, so were they the ones doing the commending? Like that they witnessed to God's faithfulness, but that's not the way it's phrased. They were the objects of the commendation, so they were the ones being commended. So it's actually so that's like, who is commending them? The Father,
right?
Like God is witnessing their faith, and so Anyway, it's just very interesting.
Yeah, because at first, whenever I was like, no, it's them,
right?
Not him. And then after like teasing it out, talking a little bit, I'm like, oh yeah, that makes a lot more sense. So yeah, it's good.
So then this through, the Greek word can mean like through, or it can mean because of or by. And so that was one that I'm like, I would have thought that it would have said that the ESV would have chosen that they were commended because of their faith. That it's like God looks at them, sees their faith, and because of that, he witnesses to it. But there seems to be an aspect of even the by grace you've been saved through faith. Like it's a channel or a vehicle of receiving that salvation. It's not because of our faith so much as it is like through our faith.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so we also talked about with James, him talking about like faith without works being dead, and you want to show me your works or you want to show me your faith without works, I'll show you my faith by works. And so that faith-filled obedience component.
Yeah, and Michael pointed out yesterday how all of the people who are listed, so there's 18 people mentioned in this chapter, and how none of it is talking about their saving faith, Lucas, as you just mentioned. But even some of them are pre-conversion. Like, so we have Abraham, before he was told to go on a journey, before he was actually even a believer. So it's just neat. I keep using the word neat today. I guess that's my favorite.
There you go.
But it's just, it is to me how you can read a scripture passage however many times and how it can grab your attention and make you see it a little differently. And we'll definitely talk about that as we get into the next chapter.
Yeah.
Which is cool.
Yeah. So since his point is not to describe like how do you get saved, his point is to encourage believers to continue in faith-filled obedience and not like recant. He's demonstrating that people who did amazing things, even people who lost their life, that they received God's commendation through faith. And so like continue having faith. That's his like the main, like if you boil it all down, that's what he's after.
Yeah. So they got to see glimpses of it fulfilled. I think, Nathan, you got to talk about that yesterday, how Abraham got to see him have a child.
Right.
But he didn't see the ultimate fulfillment of all of the nations and all of this, having as many offsprings as the sand of the shore. Yeah. So anyways, but he got to see glimpses of the fulfillment.
Yep. And so that's an interesting part of the second half of that verse. It says that all of these did not receive what was promised. And so they all received components of it. I'm thinking about like Moses' promise that God would deliver his people, that he would use him to deliver the people. And so they walked through the Red Sea, but then he didn't get to witness the ultimate deliverance. So one, he didn't get to go into the land because of his sin. And then very practically, he didn't get to witness the ultimate deliverance, which was the fact that the Exodus pointed forward to Jesus delivering his people. So then when it says, since God had provided something better for us, that something better for us is that we get to look and see God's magnificent plan of salvation.
Yeah, that's good.
It says that this was done that apart from us, they should not be made perfect. So this was a fun conversation about like, what exactly is he after here? So some options. I feel like I'm doing a lot of talking, so jump in at any point.
I was just going to say there was a lot of conversation on this, and it can spark even more excursions as we can discuss it. So,
So some questions of like, what does it mean that they should not be made perfect? Okay, so what's clear in that is perfection means completion, and that completion for believers will all happen at the same time. That we will receive our glorified bodies, that we will like experience the wedding feast of the Lamb, that the New Jerusalem will come down to earth, that all things will be made right, the judgment before the Lord, like those things are all going to happen simultaneously, and that's largely his point.
Right. So then the fun conversations that kind of come off of that is like, wait, so the people who have passed now does not have a glorified body until the second coming of Christ.
Right.
And that's been a theology that we've all kind of been taught of the, as soon as you pass, you get your glorified body. And here it's saying that apart from us, they should not be made perfect. So the us is talking about all of us saints.
Yeah. There's some other pieces of that, but then that brings up the question of like, okay, so what are they doing right now? Like people who have died, there's like in theology, they talk about a concept of like soul sleep, the idea that whenever you die, you just like drift into unconsciousness until like your soul is unconscious until the return of Jesus, or an idea of like a resting place for the dead, like a Sheol, where or even like separate resting places for the righteous dead versus the unrighteous dead, but still waiting for the the final.
That comes from Abraham's bosom and
Yep.
what's the other one?
Gehenna, right?
Yeah, is that where Lazarus was? It was in Gehenna?
The rich man and Lazarus. So the rich man would have been.
Oh,
not
yes,
Lazarus.
yes.
Yeah,
Lazarus was. Okay.
in Abraham's bosom.
Thanks.
But then it's like a lot of those teachings, we also have to be kind of careful because it's like Jesus is using it more as a parable than he is like saying, he's not saying, hey, let me tell you what heaven and hell are like.
Right.
Or what exactly what happens after death. He's using actually what their common understanding of the afterlife was like at that point, and encouraging them to like not wait until Judgment Day.
Yeah.
And to not be harsh to the poor among them.
Well, and Michael had brought it up, like a contradictory verse to this would be the thief on the cross, like we talked about. Jesus saying, "Today you will be with me in paradise," and it's like, well, if you move the punctuation just a little bit, like he's saying, "I tell you today, like presently, today you'll be with me in paradise," or I'm telling you, like in this moment today, that at some point you will be with me in paradise. So we juggle with that a little bit as well.
And the other verse that we brought up was to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. And that's taken from 2 Corinthians 5:8, which says, let me try to find the ESV. ESV says, yes, we are of good courage and we would rather be away from the body and at home with the Lord. So
It's just interesting.
it is.
I still tend to think that like from the bigger picture that's being painted, I still tend to think that there's I don't lean toward like a soul sleep approach that like, hey, I do think that whenever we die, like our spirits are present with Jesus immediately.
Like wisps.
Well, yeah. And that then at his return, we will all receive glorified bodies. I think there's enough other pieces that point that direction.
Right.
But also I think it's kind of hard to like make an airtight case about exactly what happens.
Right. It's pretty interesting to me that how we can have this type of conversation when we're talking about the church. Like, so this sermon series is going to be on the church. And here we are talking about soul sleep and hell and heaven. And, but that's the part of this podcast is to give you the other things.
Yeah.
So just cool.
And it does still make sense whenever we say that the church is the body of every person who's ever believed in God.
Yes.
Every person who's ever had faith in God. So where's the dead church right now? Anyway.
We can't get into that right now, but I would like to. Do you have anything else for chapter 11 before we move to chapter 12?
I'm thinking about like, why is he offering this as what kind of encouragement is this? It seems to be that idea that like, hey, we're not an afterthought. We're not like just coming in after the race is closed or whatever, and everybody's already at the party. But like, this is specifically stored up for us all to enter into glory together.
That's good.
And so that as an encouragement to persist. Okay, let's go. Do you want me to read the next section?
Yes, please.
Are we doing 1 and 2?
Yes.
Okay. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God.
Yeah, so this passage definitely, I've viewed this wrong for a really long time.
Well, you view it in a way that is like it's a potential option.
It is a potential option, but after hearing the other option,
You felt more compelled by the other.
Oh, 100%. So this is not people sitting in a cloud cheering us on. So in my head, do you know on the game Super Mario Brothers where you have the guy sitting in the cloud and he like throws
Throwing-
things down?
yep.
Yeah.
I do know that.
Yes. So that's what I pictured, but not them throwing things at us. Them standing up there clapping like, go, Stephanie, you can do it.
Mhm.
You're almost there. You can finish this race well.
Mhm.
And that's not how yesterday you guys described it. And I was like, oh,
Mhm.
wow, this makes way more sense.
Mhm.
And it's more like encouraging to me to hear it in that light than
Mhm.
the light that I've always thought.
Yeah, so kind of this great cloud of witnesses, kind of the two different images that emerge are either like one of like, hey, everybody who's passed on before is in heaven or like in the afterlife watching us, and they're witnessing our faith. And so the encouragement is the fact that they are witnessing us, which is typically the way I would have thought of it as well. But then in studying it, it's like, it seems like what's actually happening, or what's more likely his point, is that they are witnesses to the faithfulness of God.
Yeah.
And so we look at them and we see people who are like faithful testaments to the faithfulness of God.
Mm-hmm.
And so we look at them, the ones who've already completed the race, and we are encouraged to keep going because we see that they did it well.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Like when
That's
it's-
more encouraging to me.
Yeah. I was going to say, like, if you read it, like, let us also lay aside every weight. Like, we're not laying aside every weight because they're watching us.
Right.
It's because they set such a great
Mhm.
example. You know,
That's
we
good.
can also do the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's also this hinge in the beginning of this chapter
Mm-hmm.
of the therefore. So it's the hinge of the examples of the Old Testament saints, and then now us.
Mhm.
And I think that's pretty impactful when we're looking at this because, yeah, we need to be looking at the saints who have gone
Mhm.
before us of
That's good.
like, we can do this too. Like, I
Mhm.
think of personally people within our church body who have already gone.
Mhm.
And man, what an encouragement they have been. And it's like,
Mhm.
I can do this.
Mm-hmm.
So.
I really appreciate that. I'm thinking about like times where I've been to a funeral of someone who like really deeply loved the Lord.
Yeah.
And I've thought like there's something that happens in that moment where it's like I'm confronted by my mortality, and also I'm inspired that like I want that to be what people say about me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so I experienced that with JC Morrow. And as people are describing him, he was so obviously like a person who loved the Lord, and had a significant impact on those around him. I'm like, I hope my funeral sounds like this.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And so I think like that's very similar to what's going on here. He's saying like all these people received a commendation from the Lord. Like, let's look at their example.
Mm-hmm.
I think another reason I lean that way versus that they're witnessing us is like I've always kind of wondered. I mean, you go very, very practically, and this might be too literal or whatever, but very practically, like how in the world would so whenever we go to heaven, we don't become limitless. Like we
Right.
are still confined to one location. So it's like we still experience time linearly. So it's like, I mean, I guess in theory, you could have people who have entered into the afterlife who then like in some way get close enough to see and follow one of us around. But you can't have them all looking down and like seeing everything because you don't become omniscient or
Right.
omnipresent. So it's
Mhm.
like God can see all of us, but like people in heaven can't.
Well, and then the other thing that I was thinking of yesterday was whenever we get to heaven, whenever we're in the presence of the Lord, that's going to be our focus.
Yeah.
That is going to be the thing. He is going to be the one we
Mhm.
worship and learn from.
Mhm.
I got to have a great conversation with someone last night about how when we get to heaven, we're still going to be finite and he's
Mhm.
always going to be
Mhm.
infinite.
Mhm.
And one of my favorite things to do is learn about God
Mhm.
and how I'm still going to be learning about him.
Mhm.
That's just insane to
And
me.
never reach the end of it.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, obviously speaking from speculation,
Oh, I love
I'm
it.
surely, you know, logically trying to think it out, you know, if someone's devoted their life to God and then they pass away and they're in that presence of him, surely they're not looking down like, come on, little buddy, like you got this. Like, I mean,
Right.
Surely not.
Mhm.
Surely they'd be all about the worship and waiting
Mm-hmm.
for us to get there.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm. And that may hurt some people's feelings.
Yeah, it might. It could be really challenging. Like I don't want to be insensitive because I think a lot
Right.
of times there's
Mhm.
the idea of like, hey, grandpa's looking down on you and he's proud of you and those kinds of things. It's like I don't think we should say definitively that that's like
Right.
absolutely wrong or whatever, but I think we can say it doesn't seem to be like what the text is actually trying to communicate.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Like it's not that Moses is like paying attention to what's happening right here and right now, and but more that the life of Moses was a testament to the faithfulness of God, and because we've seen all these people walk it out, like we are carrying the torch, we're picking up the baton.
Mhm.
Mhm. So we have also lay aside every weight.
Mhm.
So any hindrance, we're supposed to lay it aside. And then the let us run. So this is not walk. I think Madison spoke on this a few weeks ago in our staff devotional, how we see walking with the Lord all throughout scripture.
Mhm.
And this is one part where it tells us to let us run with
Mhm.
endurance. So this is a sense of urgency.
Mhm.
It is a marathon. It's not a sprint and it's not a walk.
Yep.
So it's something that you're training for.
Mhm.
And then like endurance is determination.
Mhm.
So
That's good.
I really, it is good. It's, I guess there's just like a new light that was opened while I was studying this go around this
Mhm.
section. And it just made me fall in love a little bit more with
Mhm.
Hebrews.
Mm-hmm. Which is not
Right.
something you needed.
Right. You said it yesterday. You're like, Hebrews is considered like one of the hardest texts to study.
Because there's so much like Old Testament that you might not be familiar with. So it's like the story of Melchizedek is a weird story.
But
It's
that's
like,
what made me fall in love.
I know. You just had to, and it's because you had to go do so much work and study on it that the discovery that whenever it finally clicked for you, it just like was that much richer.
Mm-hmm.
That's why you loved it. You like put in the work and saw the results.
And Lucas, you can tell the story about how I made you guys study it.
Well, college group had really not been around super long, and we were trying to find, books to study instead of like sermon questions. We had just transitioned just to doing something else and fresh, and the Hebrews was not unfortunately, I learned a lot, but Hebrews was the second book that we studied, and it was just so much Old Testament stuff that a lot of us really didn't know. So I was like nose deep in commentaries for like 4 hours before group, so we could figure it all out. It was okay. It was a little bit of a mess, but
You learned so much.
yes, you apologized yesterday, but you don't have to. You don't need to.
But also, if you could apologize. One more
But
time.
yes.
But you learned so much.
Mm-hmm.
Love it. So then we have looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith. So I love this verse. It's actually in the song "Jesus Christ, My Hope of Glory" that our team wrote. This line is in that song. This verse in particular, it's one that I love because I see like Jesus at like going before and like sustaining throughout our faith. Although this time reading it, I discovered that it's like a little bit different than I've thought in the past. So I thought a founder is just like the person who starts it or lays the foundation, which is true about our faith.
Right.
But actually the founder here has more to do with like being the first runner or the pioneer. So it's actually more saying it's less about our faith or my faith individually, and it's more about the faith, that Jesus was the first one, like he was the one who lived it perfectly, that he was the pioneer, and he's the one who brings it to completion. So our faith is like started and finished by Jesus. Anyway, so a little different, but very cool.
No. I think that's really good to bring out. So the looking to Jesus could also be fixed on Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
So I imagine this as the founder and perfecter perfecter of our faith. So we're so focused on Jesus at the end of the finish line. He is the only thing that we see at the end. And so we're running as hard and fast as we possibly can because we're looking towards him the whole time and never looking any other way.
Yeah.
So it starts with like the witnesses, and then they were a great example. But I'm going to give you the perfect example, which is Christ.
Yeah. Which I think fits the theme really well of how Jesus is better.
Yeah.
So it's like continuing on. It's like, hey, there's all these amazing witnesses and they've gone before. Let me tell you about the best. Yeah.
So, and then it goes into the gospel, endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. So seated is finished. So whenever that's back to the Old Testament, thinking of priests, whenever they would finish the work, they would sit down, and right hand is a sign of authority. So despising the shame. Did you guys have anything for that?
For me, I just like know this kind of a weird English phrase because it makes it sound like that. Oh man, I hate that shame. But like the word despise has more here has like the Greek word has more of a connotation of like looking down on or something or devaluing. Which if we think of it as a person, we would call that despising. If I devalued you, then like if I'm despising you, like I'm treating you as a piece of garbage or whatever. But here it means that as he's devaluing the shame, he's like seeing it as just not worth comparing to the joy that's set before him.
Yeah.
Like he sees the joy and it so far outweighs the shame that he just like doesn't even consider it.
So that he was joyful to endure the cross.
The joy that was set before him. So again, like you talked about like what was at the finish line for us. What was at the finish line for Jesus?
Yeah. I talked about it a little bit yesterday, but I mean, in scripture, we see a lot of, choosing joy. Well, this is what supports us as humans, and this is what supported the human soul of Jesus. He rejoiced in that his suffering would bring satisfaction to the injured justice of God, that he would seal the covenant of grace, that he would restore humanity back to what it was before. Like that's what he had to look forward to, because if not, then what was the prize at the end?
It's good.
Yeah, I'm thinking about like even the joy of like the pleasure of his Father, him having completed the plan. I'm thinking about like receiving his bride. Like, so even it's a restoration thing. And it's also like better than restoration because it's not just back to Eden. It's like now he's redeemed his bride. And so the joy set before him is that joy, all of it. Last couple verses?
Yes, please.
Okay, 3 and 4. Consider him who endured from sinners such hostility against himself, so that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted. In your struggle against sin, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood.
Yeah, so again, it's that that pushing on, right? It's that, so that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted. Like he's laying this out there so much so we can keep pushing on. Like we have all of this ahead of us. And so that's how I got it. And then there was another commentator that said, like, knowing that Jesus doesn't ask more of us than what he himself experienced.
Yeah.
And that he knows exactly what we are going through, and keeps us from growing weary and faint-hearted.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't have anything like specific for 3 and 4, like any of the phrases or anything, but it's verse 4 essentially. In your struggle against sin, you've not resisted yet to the point of shedding your blood. I know we landed on this could be like physical martyrdom. We talked about in the Hall of Faith, like a few verses after, we talked about some of their fates and being killed with a sword or sawn in two, and then also like comparing your sufferings to Christ, like metaphorically, like you have not shed blood, like you have not struggled so much so as Christ did, and so that's why he's a perfect example to look to for patience or perseverance, and not grow weary or faint-hearted, because he's the perfect example to imitate that.
Yeah. That's really good.
Mm-hmm.
I was just doing a quick study on that word consider him, because I think for us, we use consider often. If somebody brings up something like, hey, you might, do you want to do that? It's like, I'll consider it.
Mm-hmm.
It means like, I'll give it a thought whenever I get a minute. But consider him who endured the cross. Here, that word consider means to think or reason with thoroughness and completeness, to think out carefully, to reason thoroughly, to consider carefully, to reason. And so, like, to think thoroughly about what Jesus went through, to think thoroughly about who he is and what he's done, like completely, not just consider, like, hey, think about Jesus whenever you get a chance. If he comes to mind, like, consider him. But to thoroughly examine the example of Jesus. And then after that, so for these people, hey, you're going to be tempted to recant your faith. Like, think long and hard about what Jesus did for you. Do you really want to turn away?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really good.
We talked some about the struggle against sin and had some questions about, like, whose sin is it? Are we talking about the, like, sin, sinful people in the world, or your own sin? And it seems like probably yes. Like, both. It's just like, it's just the struggle against sin is kind of the race that we are set out to endure. Like, it's a struggle against things outside of us, things inside of us. It is the work between now and going home to be with Jesus is a struggle. Well, you could just characterize it as a struggle against sin.
Mm-hmm.
So, anything else, you guys?
No.
Nope.
Okay. Yeah, I'm excited about this one. I think it will be neat. I know that Michael's intending to also pick up some pieces of, like, Cornerstone history, because there's some really neat examples. Some of those witnesses that have even gone on that were part of, Cornerstone beginning and getting started and being established. And so this is going to be a neat week just to kind of reflect on, like, our part in the story, what it looks like to carry on. I love that this is in a world where we're, like, constantly obsessed with what's next.
Yeah.
I love that this is a moment where we look back and recognize that we're tethered to an ancient history, like a long line of people who have had faith in God. Anything you guys are excited about that you want to share?
I'm really excited for people to learn more about the Cloud of Witnesses. I think that's just because I was really excited to learn about it. So I'm looking forward to other people learning that as well. And then it is such an encouraging text whenever we think of it as, like, continuing on and not giving up. When we look at this text as, like, man, there's so many saints who have gone before us and, like, held close to the faith and didn't give up through all of the challenges that they went through in their life. And so it's just really encouraging to me.
Yeah.
What about you?
Yeah. A couple of things. One thing, for me, the concept of heaven, like the end of our race, I feel like isn't talked about a whole lot for some reason. And so, like, anytime I'm really struggling, I just forget to think about
how this ends.
Yeah, like how this ends. Like, what am I enduring for? And then it was also really convicting, the Abraham and Moses and all the people that were before us. Like, when we talk about having faith, wanting to have a faith like David, or having a faith like Moses, or having a faith like these people, they didn't have Jesus. The quality of their faith, like we said, was taking God at his word right then. And so it's convicting of, like, we say we want to have faith like this person or that person, and not in a shameful way, but it's like, you have the full picture now. Like, you should be just as devoted, if not more,
right,
to the faith.
Yeah, that's good. I like it. Well, good stuff, everybody.
Okay, hold on. I got to list the names. I want people to vote on this. What their new name is going to be.
Okay.
This is...
the people need to have a say.
They do. Dusty Ray just texted me and said Podstalkers, and with a whole bunch of laughing emojis. So okay. So
well,
I feel like people don't love it.
Well, I mean, you've had a lot of people tell you that it's really creepy.
2, 3.
I've told you
a
4. Bunch of times.
It's you too?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
No, I don't like it.
Okay, so there's the warehouse faithful,
Mm-hmm.
pod seekers, the wordy nerdies, seeking the word, get it? That's what she
Yeah.
said. And then the word seekers, the warehouse wanderers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Those are options.
those are options that
And
Chris gave us.
I really appreciate because that's more effort than I think any of us have put into coming up with names for
I've
this.
put in a lot of effort.
Yeah, but not as much as Chris.
What? I tried
don't-
so hard.
What were the other names?
I don't want to
And
tell
you landed on Podstalkers?
Stalkers, Stockers, ERS.
Mhm. Yeah.
I think we can just acknowledge that if that was the best of the best of the options, that you did not spend enough time on it.
Wow. Okay,
Oh.
so well, hopefully,
Yeah.
Somebody-
Hopefully other people like weigh in and give some of their opinions
yeah,
on what we should call them.
coming up on our
on there.
100th episode too.
Oh yeah, it'd be a great time to christen a new name for you all.
Okay.
Okay. Well, thank you guys, you Warehouse Wanderers, for joining us
Hey.
today. We appreciate, several of you have just been like super thoughtful in sending us little notes about like how this helps you prep for the sermon or helps you reflect after the sermon. And I just want to say thanks. Like we love getting to do this, and we love also like knowing that it's making a difference for you. So thank you guys for listening. It's awesome. I hope this has been enlightening and refreshing and encouraging for you. If you've got thoughts or questions, you can send them to us, warehouse@cornerstone.team, and we will catch you later.
Yeah. So thankful.